Hi, and welcome to this brief presentation about the SWIF tool guidelines and specifically about mapping outcome polygons. My name is Jules Fennell and I'm the Merry and Planning Coordinator at NQ Tropics. This presentation is intended to complement the SWIF tool guidelines, which are available on the NRM Regions Queensland website under the SWIF Resources section. The SWIF tool is an ARC-based GIS tool that guides users through a step-by-step process to map and code polygons for their project, as well as planning out monitoring and developing a condition monitoring plan. At this stage, it is hoped the tool will be available in late 2024. Even if you're not using the SWIF tool though, these guidelines and this presentation will be helpful in understanding how to apply the statewide indicator framework, and it's recommended that you have the SWIF tool guidelines with you as you watch the presentation, as we'll be referring to them as we go along. This presentation is only short, around 15 minutes, and we'll be concentrating on understanding the concept of how outcome polygons are mapped for the SWIF. The Statewide Indicator Framework, or SWIF, encompasses all aspects of mapping, monitoring and reporting project data. The SWIF tool and this presentation focuses only on the biophysical aspect of the SWIF, that is anything involving a physical change in the landscape, such as improved native vegetation condition or improved wetland health. For the SWIF to work, all users need to be mapping and monitoring their projects in the same way. Now, the SWIF is designed on a program logic, which is on page 3 of your guidelines, and there's 4 key aspects as to how it works. So we have the outcomes, and you can think of this as the change that you're trying to achieve in the landscape, the deliverables, which is how you're going to achieve that change, the spatial data that tells us where and over how much area that change has been created, and the monitoring methodologies, which is the way that we report and measure the change that we've created. So the SWIF sets out how each of these aspects is going to be undertaken and recorded to ensure consistency across the state. In this presentation, we're going to be focusing on the outcomes. So it can be helpful to think of the outcomes as the why and the what. When we undertake a project, there is a reason why we're doing it. For example, we don't just go and remove weeds from an area for the sake of it. We're doing it because we're trying to improve the condition of that area of the landscape. This is the why, the reason why we are doing it. The outcome also reflects what we are trying to change. So this could be improving land condition, improving native vegetation extent, or reducing sediment. So the outcome reflects what we are trying to change and why. Under the SWIF, there's a prescribed list of outcomes that we align with. The deliverables then reflect the how of the change that we're creating. So deliverables is a group term for the intervention we will apply to bring about the change. It's important to understand that deliverables are not single activities, but rather the group of activities that we will undertake to manage threats or improve grazing practice or repair gullies, for example. The table on page 13 of the guide, which is this large one here, will be useful in understanding the relationship between outcomes, deliverables and activities. If we have our why, what and how, our spatial data is what shows us the where. It's the mapping that specifies where the change in the landscape will occur and over how many hectares. When we look at mapping for the SWIF, it's important to understand that we only want to map the area where there will be an outcome. That is, where there will be a change in condition, and we will be monitoring that area with the appropriate monitoring tool to be able to show the change in condition. Unlike some of the mapping that you might have done for other projects, in the SWIF, we do not map the entire property or catchment. It's very unlikely that we're going to be creating measurable change on that scale, or that we'd be able to conduct sufficient monitoring on that scale to show the change. The SWIF requires that we're very clear about exactly where we're trying to create the change and that we'll be able to measure that change. Likewise, the SWIF does not map where we're going to be doing activities such as installing fences or undertaking pest animal control. While some of our activities might occur in the same area that we're intending to change, for example, if we're removing woody weeds to improve native vegetation condition, those two things might be in the same place, but it's not the activities we're mapping, only the area of change. So let's look at an example. In this case, we have a relatively small area of native vegetation that we want to improve the condition of. At the moment, there's several threats that are degrading its condition, including cattle access, woody weeds, and the effects of feral animals. The site is part of a much larger project that's addressing native vegetation condition throughout a catchment area, but for this case we're just going to look at one of our project sites, which represents a discrete area of condition change. So you can see on the right now that we've mapped our outcome polygon in green there, and that it only covers an area of native vegetation that we're aiming to improve. So it's not the whole property that it's on or the larger area around it. So in this way, we're making sure that our outcome polygon accurately reflects the area of change that we're trying to create and where we will be monitoring to be able to show that change. In this slide, you can now see the area where the planned aerial culling will take place, which is outlined in yellow. If you look, you can still see our outcome polygon in green inside this area. For the SWIF, we don't need to map the area of the feral animal cull. You might choose to do so for your own purposes, such as planning or collating your organisational data, but it doesn't get mapped for the SWIF because it's not an outcome area. So it's not the area where we are creating the change in vegetation condition that we're going to monitor. So in the SWIF, we still capture the data about what was done, but it's captured in a different way, and that's captured in the guidelines on page 6. So we're going to look at another example now, and this is a grazing property. So in the map on the right, the property boundary is represented by the yellow polygon, and the property is nearly 400,000 hectares in size. The outcome for this project is improved land condition, and we're going to achieve that by improving their grazing management practices. While we would hope that increasing the knowledge of the landholders would lead to improved grazing management over the whole property, it's not a realistic goal within the project timeframe or budget, and nor would we be able to sufficiently monitor 400,000 hectares to show improved land condition. So therefore, this project is going to focus on 2 paddocks where infrastructure will be installed to support the improved grazing regime. So what we can see now is a green polygon, which is our outcome polygon. It represents the 2 adjacent paddocks where we're expecting to improve the land condition. What you can also see in the map is the brown polygons, which have been cut out of the outcome polygon. And that's because these are areas that aren't like the land we're trying to change. They're things like high ridge lines and dams. As they won't be changed and they won't be monitored, we don't need to include them in our outcome polygon. So once we've taken these areas out, the remaining area is an accurate representation of the area where we'll be creating change and monitoring for that change. If we hadn't have removed those areas, we'd be claiming over 1,000 hectares of condition change that didn't happen. Excluding those areas also means that we don't have to monitor them, which reduces our monitoring load. You'll also notice that none of our infrastructure is mapped here. So again, this doesn't need to be mapped for the SWIF, although it's quite likely you'd map it somewhere else for your organisational data. All the infrastructure installation will be captured through a Survey 123 form, and that's detailed again, page 6 of the guidelines. So all of this can be done without the SWIF tool, but I'm going to show you here how the SWIF tool approaches mapping outcome polygons. So firstly, the tool asks you to map a project site. So this is just putting a boundary around the area or areas where you're going to be working. The project site can be a property or a catchment or over several properties. Basically, you can think of it as a container for your outcome polygons will be. And at the end of the mapping process, when you've finalised all your outcome polygons, that project site polygon will actually be removed. Now, as you work through each step in the tool, guidance will be provided within the tool to ensure you understand what you are mapping and why. So you can see on that slide there an example of the kind of guidance that's provided within the tool. So once you've mapped your project site polygon, your container, you'll then start to identify the specific areas of change within it that will become your outcome polygons. Now, as an outcome polygon can only have one outcome assigned to it, you may need to map several outcome polygons within your project site. So for example, if you were going to improve native vegetation condition along a riparian zone, but you're also going to be improving land condition in the surrounding paddocks, you'll need to map a vegetation condition outcome polygon and a land condition outcome polygon. And again, the SWIF tool will guide you through these steps and ensure that you can only pick one outcome per polygon. So as we saw in our previous example, we want to exclude any areas that aren't going to change, that aren't part of our outcome area. And the SWIF tool includes a step for doing this. So it enables you to map these areas out and then clip them out of your outcome polygon. So again, your outcome polygon is as accurate as it can be. So hopefully by now you will understand how to map an outcome polygon and why it's done this way. When you're mapping for the SWIF, whether you're using the SWIF tool or not, you should be asking yourself these two questions. Is the area you are mapping an accurate reflection of where you are intending to create a change in condition? And will you be monitoring that whole mapped area to show the change in condition? If your answer to either or both of these questions is no, you need to go back and rethink your mapping because it's not an outcome polygon. So this presentation is focused on one small but fundamental concept to understand when you're mapping for the SWIF. However, there's a lot more involved. And again, this is where the guidelines are useful as they provide information on other processes such as stratifying your outcome polygons. If you do get stuck on any aspect of the SWIF, NRM Regions Queensland are there to provide assistance and advice. So thank you for watching this presentation and happy mapping.